In the shadow of Mount Rushmore, where the faces of presidents watch over the Black Hills of South Dakota, some secrets are carved deeper than stone. The kind of secrets that destroy lives, shatter families, and corrupt the very foundations of trust that small communities are built upon. This is the story of how one woman's courage to speak truth to power brought down a man who thought his wealth and influence made him untouchable. The courthouse in Rapid City had never seen a divorce trial quite like Anderson versus Anderson. What began as a simple dissolution of marriage between two of Custer County's most prominent citizens would ultimately expose a web of fraud, embezzlement, and corruption that reached from the boardrooms of corporate America to the sacred trust between husband and wife. But this story really begins 18 months earlier, in a cramped office overlooking the snow-covered peaks of the Black Hills, where a woman named Mary Running Bear made a discovery that would change everything. The blizzard that swept across the Black Hills in February 2024 was the kind that reminded you why the Lakota called these mountains sacred. As chief financial officer of Anderson Mining Corporation, Mary Running Bear had seen plenty of storms, both meteorological and financial, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to uncover in the company's quarterly reports. Mary had worked her way up from bookkeeper to CFO over 14 years, earning her CPA while raising 3 children as a single mother on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Her grandmother had taught her that numbers, like the wind patterns across the prairie, always told the truth if you knew how to read them. The numbers she was reading now were telling a story that made her blood run cold. Thomas Anderson, CEO and majority owner of Anderson Mining Corporation, had been systematically transferring company funds to offshore accounts for over 2 years. The pattern was sophisticated and nearly invisible, hidden within legitimate business expenses and masked by the complex financial structures that mining companies use to manage their operations across multiple states. But Mary's trained eye caught what others had missed. Equipment purchases that didn't match inventory records. Consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist. Travel expenses for business trips that had no corresponding meetings or client visits. When she cross-referenced Anderson's expense reports with his actual calendar and business activities, the fraud became undeniable. Anderson Mining Corporation was a third-generation family business that had grown from a small gold mining operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise with operations across the northern Rocky Mountains. Thomas Anderson had inherited control of the company from his father, Robert Anderson, who had built it from nothing after returning from Vietnam with a Purple Heart and a determination to make something of himself in the Black Hills. What made Mary's discovery even more disturbing was the timing. Thomas Anderson was in the middle of a contentious divorce from his wife of 25 years, Susan Anderson, who had been fighting for months to get accurate financial disclosure about their marital assets. The money that Thomas was hiding offshore represented assets that legally belonged to both of them, money that Susan had no idea existed. The amounts were staggering. Over the course of 24 months, Thomas had diverted nearly $3 million from company accounts into a complex network of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. For a company based in Custer, South Dakota, with fewer than 200 employees, this represented a theft of resources that could have paid salaries, funded expansion, or provided security for dozens of families who depended on Anderson Mining for their livelihoods. Mary spent 3 weeks carefully documenting every suspicious transaction before she made the decision that would ultimately cost her everything she had worked to build. On a bitter cold morning in March, she knocked on Thomas Anderson's office door carrying evidence that would expose one of the most elaborate financial fraud schemes in South Dakota history. Thomas Anderson was everything you would expect from a third-generation mining executive: confident, well-dressed, and accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. His corner office overlooked the company's main facility, where massive trucks and excavation equipment moved gold-bearing or from the company's various mining claims throughout the Black Hills region. When Mary presented her evidence, Thomas's reaction should have warned her about what was coming. Instead of surprise or concern, he displayed the cold calculation of a man who had been expecting this moment and had already prepared his response. The confrontation lasted less than 20 minutes. Thomas dismissed Mary's evidence as misunderstanding of sophisticated financial strategies that were beyond her expertise. He suggested that her concerns were the result of personal stress and professional jealousy. Most ominously, he reminded her of the comprehensive non-disclosure agreement she had signed when she was promoted to CFO, and he made it clear that violating that agreement would result in serious legal consequences. Mary left that meeting knowing that Thomas Anderson had no intention of returning the stolen money or disclosing the hidden assets to his wife. She also knew that her career at Anderson Mining Corporation was effectively over, regardless of what she decided to do next. The retaliation began immediately. Within a week, Mary found herself excluded from financial planning meetings she had previously led. Her access to certain company accounts was restricted without explanation. Several colleagues mentioned that they had been asked to document instances where Mary had supposedly been difficult to work with or had questioned management decisions. The psychological pressure was systematic and relentless. Thomas Anderson was using every tool at his disposal to isolate Mary professionally and personally, making it clear that challenging his authority would result in the destruction of everything she had worked to achieve. But Thomas Anderson had made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated Mary Running Bear's understanding of federal financial regulations and her connections within the law enforcement community. More importantly, he had failed to recognize that some people will accept any personal cost to ensure that justice is served. Mary Running Bear was fired on a Tuesday morning in April 2024, exactly 6 weeks after she had confronted Thomas Anderson about his fraudulent activities. The termination letter cited performance issues, inability to adapt to evolving financial strategies, and concerns about professional judgment and collaborative leadership. The official reasons were carefully crafted to provide legal justification for the termination while making it nearly impossible for Mary to prove retaliation. Her performance reviews had been systematically downgraded over the previous 2 months, her responsibilities had been gradually reduced, and several colleagues had been asked to document instances of supposed professional conflicts. The exit interview was conducted by Janet Olson, the human resources director who had worked at Anderson Mining for over 20 years. Janet had known Mary since her early days as a bookkeeper, had supported her promotion to CFO, and was clearly uncomfortable with the instructions she had received from Thomas Anderson. During the interview, Janet made several comments that came as close to an admission of retaliation as Mary was likely to get. She mentioned that the termination decision had come directly from Thomas Anderson, that she had been instructed to document performance issues that would justify immediate dismissal, and that the company was concerned about potential legal liability if Mary remained in her position. Mary carefully documented every aspect of the termination process, knowing that the evidence would be crucial if she decided to file a wrongful termination lawsuit. But her immediate concern was not her own legal remedies. It was ensuring that Thomas Anderson's criminal activities were exposed and that Susan Anderson received the justice she deserved. Within 24 hours of Mary's termination, Thomas Anderson launched a comprehensive campaign to destroy her professional reputation throughout the Black Hills business community. He contacted other mining companies, accounting firms, and financial institutions, warning them that Mary was difficult to work with and had been terminated for serious performance issues. The campaign was sophisticated and effective. Job interviews that had been scheduled were suddenly canceled. Professional contacts who had known Mary for years began treating her with suspicion and distance. The tight-knit business community of western South Dakota was small enough that Thomas Anderson's influence could reach every potential employer in the region. But Thomas Anderson had made a crucial error in his calculation. He had assumed that Mary would be intimidated by the threat of professional and financial ruin, and that she would choose to remain silent rather than risk everything she had worked to achieve. He had no understanding of the cultural values that had shaped Mary's character, or the strength she drew from her grandmother's teachings about truth and justice. Mary Running Bear was not just any disgruntled employee. She was a member of the Oglala Lakota Nation, a certified public accountant with 14 years of experience in financial fraud investigation, and a single mother who had overcome poverty and discrimination to build a successful career in a male-dominated industry. More importantly, she was a woman who understood that some fights are worth any personal cost. 3 days after her termination, Mary contacted FBI agent William Ironclad, a member of the Crow Nation who specialized in financial crimes on tribal lands and had worked with Mary on several previous cases involving fraud against Native American communities. Agent Ironcloud listened to Mary's story with the kind of focused attention that she had learned to associate with federal law enforcement officers who had seen enough corruption to recognize the real thing when they encountered it. Agent Ironcloud explained that the FBI had been tracking several cases involving sophisticated financial fraud schemes designed to hide assets during divorce proceedings. Mary's evidence fit perfectly into a pattern of criminal activity that federal investigators had been documenting across multiple states and jurisdictions. The investigation that followed would ultimately expose not just Thomas Anderson's fraud, but a broader network of financial crimes that had been operating throughout the northern Rocky Mountain region for over 5 years. Mary's courage in coming forward had opened a door that would lead to dozens of additional investigations and prosecutions. But the most immediate impact of Mary's decision would be felt in the Pennington County Courthouse, where Susan Anderson was still fighting for accurate financial disclosure in what everyone assumed was a straightforward divorce case. Agent William Ironcloud had been investigating financial crimes in Indian country for over 15 years, and he had learned to recognize the patterns that indicated sophisticated fraud schemes. Mary Running Bear's evidence showed all the hallmarks of a criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for years, protected by the assumption that nobody would have the expertise or courage to challenge it. The investigation began with a comprehensive analysis of Anderson Mining Corporation's financial records dating back 5 years. Federal forensic accountants worked with Mary to trace the flow of money from legitimate business accounts into the complex network of shell companies that Thomas Anderson had established to hide his theft. What they discovered was even more extensive than Mary had initially realized. Thomas Anderson had been systematically looting Anderson Mining Corporation for over 4 years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to mask the theft and avoid detection. The total amount stolen exceeded $12 million, representing nearly a third of the company's annual revenue and enough money to have provided significant wage increases for every employee in the operation. The investigation revealed that Thomas Anderson had been working with a network of financial advisors, attorneys, and corporate consultants who specialized in what they called asset protection strategies for wealthy individuals going through divorce proceedings. The network operated across multiple states and had been helping dozens of clients hide money from their spouses using similar techniques. Federal investigators discovered that Thomas Anderson had been paying substantial fees to a consulting firm called Mountain West Financial Services, which was actually a front operation for a group of lawyers and accountants who specialized in helping clients commit financial fraud. The firm had been operating for over 8 years and had helped clients hide over $200 million in assets during divorce proceedings. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Thomas Anderson wasn't just stealing from his own company, he was part of a criminal network that had been systematically defrauding the court system and depriving divorced spouses of their legal rights to marital assets. The network had been operating with virtual impunity because most victims lacked the resources or expertise to challenge sophisticated financial fraud schemes. But the investigation also revealed something that would prove crucial to bringing down the entire network. Thomas Anderson had been keeping detailed records of his criminal activities, apparently believing that the documentation would provide legal protection if he was ever investigated. Instead, his meticulous record-keeping provided federal investigators with a roadmap to every aspect of the conspiracy. Agent Ironcloud explained to Mary that her evidence would be crucial not just in prosecuting Thomas Anderson, but in dismantling the entire criminal network that had been operating throughout the region. The Justice Department was prepared to bring federal charges against multiple defendants, and Mary's testimony would be essential in proving the scope and sophistication of the fraud scheme. The investigation took 8 months to complete, during which time Mary struggled to find employment and support her family. Thomas Anderson's campaign to destroy her reputation had been effective, and she found herself effectively blacklisted from the financial services industry throughout South Dakota and the surrounding states. But Mary's situation changed dramatically when she received a call from Patricia Standing Bear, a prominent attorney in Rapid City who specialized in representing Native American clients in complex legal matters. Patricia had been retained by Susan Anderson to handle her divorce case, and she had learned about Mary's evidence from Agent Ironcloud. Patricia Standing Bear was exactly the kind of attorney you would want representing you in a high-stakes divorce case involving hidden assets. She had built her career fighting for clients who were being victimized by powerful individuals who thought their wealth and influence made them untouchable. Her reputation for finding hidden assets and holding fraudulent spouses accountable had made her one of the most sought-after divorce attorneys in the region. The meeting between Mary and Patricia would prove to be the turning point in both the federal investigation and Susan Anderson's divorce case. Mary's evidence provided the key to unlocking millions of dollars in hidden assets, while Patricia's legal expertise provided the framework for ensuring that justice would be served in both the criminal and civil proceedings. The Pennington County Courthouse in Rapid City had been the site of countless divorce proceedings over the decades, but none had attracted the kind of attention that surrounded Anderson versus Anderson. The case had become front-page news throughout the Black Hills region, not just because of the prominent families involved, but because of the federal criminal investigation that had grown out of the divorce proceedings. Judge Margaret Ironshell had been handling complex divorce cases for over 20 years, and she had developed a reputation for being thorough, fair, and absolutely intolerant of any attempts to hide assets or mislead the court. Her background as a former federal prosecutor had given her the expertise to recognize sophisticated financial fraud, and she had made it clear from the beginning that she would not tolerate any attempts to deceive her court. Thomas Anderson arrived at the courthouse with a team of 3 attorneys led by Harold Whitman, one of the most expensive divorce lawyers in South Dakota. Whitman had built his career representing wealthy clients who were trying to minimize their financial exposure during divorce proceedings. And he had developed a reputation for using aggressive tactics to intimidate opposing counsel and protect his clients' assets. Susan Anderson sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia Standing Bear, looking nervous but determined. Susan had been fighting for over 2 years to get accurate financial disclosure from her husband, and she had been frustrated by the legal system's apparent inability to force Thomas to provide honest information about their marital assets. What Susan didn't know was that Patricia Standing Bear had been working with federal investigators for months to prepare a case that would expose the full scope of Thomas Anderson's criminal activities. The evidence that Mary Running Bear had provided would prove that Thomas had been systematically stealing from his own company while lying to the court about the true extent of their marital assets. When Patricia Standing Bear called Mary Running Bear to the witness stand, the packed courtroom fell silent. Everyone knew that Mary's testimony would be crucial to the outcome of the case, but they had no idea how devastating the evidence would be for Thomas Anderson. Mary spent the first hour of her testimony explaining her professional background, her role at Anderson Mining Corporation, and her access to the company's financial records. She described her education at Black Hills State University, her certification as a CPA, and her 14 years of experience in financial management and fraud investigation. The real impact of Mary's testimony began when she started explaining the evidence she had discovered. Using charts, bank records, and financial documents, she walked the court through the complex scheme that Thomas Anderson had used to hide millions of dollars in assets from his wife and steal money from his own company. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Bank records showed the exact flow of money from Anderson Mining Corporation accounts to offshore shell companies. Travel records proved that Thomas had been making monthly trips to banking havens in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Email correspondence revealed detailed discussions with financial advisors about strategies for hiding assets during divorce proceedings. Mary's testimony revealed that Thomas Anderson had hidden over $3 million in assets that legally belonged to both him and Susan. The money had been stolen from Anderson Mining Corporation and moved through a complex network of shell companies specifically designed to keep it hidden from the divorce court. But the most damaging aspect of Mary's testimony was her explanation of how Thomas Anderson had been lying to the court for over 2 years. The financial disclosure documents he had provided showed assets of approximately $1 million, mostly in real estate and retirement accounts. The $3 million that Mary had discovered represented a fortune that Susan Anderson had no idea existed. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Mary explained the sophisticated nature of the fraud scheme. This wasn't just a husband trying to hide money from his wife. It was a systematic criminal enterprise that had been operating for years and had victimized not just Susan Anderson, but the employees and shareholders of Anderson Mining Corporation. Harold Whitman's cross-examination of Mary was aggressive and sustained, but ultimately ineffective. He tried to portray Mary as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge against her former boss, but he couldn't challenge the bank records, financial documents, and federal evidence that supported every aspect of her testimony. Whitman suggested that Mary's termination had been justified by legitimate performance issues, but Mary's response was devastating. She calmly explained that she had been fired the day after confronting Thomas Anderson about his criminal activities, and that the performance issues cited in her termination letter had been fabricated to provide legal justification for retaliation. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from federal agents, forensic accountants, and other witnesses who supported Mary's findings. But the turning point came when Patricia Standing Bear presented evidence that Thomas Anderson had been actively concealing assets even while under court order to provide complete financial disclosure. Agent William Ironclad testified about the federal investigation that had grown out of Mary's evidence, explaining that Thomas Anderson was part of a criminal network that had been helping wealthy individuals hide assets during divorce proceedings. The investigation had revealed similar fraud schemes throughout the region, with total losses exceeding $200 million. Dr. Sarah Broken Arrow, a forensic accountant who had been working with federal investigators, testified about the sophisticated nature of the fraud scheme and the methods that Thomas Anderson had used to hide his criminal activities. Her analysis showed that the fraud had been carefully planned and executed over several years, with the specific intent of defrauding both the court system and Anderson Mining Corporation. The evidence presented during the trial painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that went far beyond simple asset hiding. Thomas Anderson had been operating a sophisticated fraud scheme that had enriched him personally while stealing from his employees, his shareholders, and his wife. Judge Margaret Ironshell took 5 days to review the evidence before delivering her verdict. The courtroom was packed with reporters, attorneys, and curious observers who had been following the case for months. The judge's ruling would not only determine the outcome of the divorce proceedings but would also send a message about how the legal system would respond to sophisticated financial fraud. Judge Ironshell's ruling was comprehensive and devastating for Thomas Anderson. She found that he had engaged in systematic fraud and concealment of marital assets, and that his actions represented a serious violation of his legal obligations to the court and to his wife. The judge ordered Thomas Anderson to pay Susan Anderson $8 million in hidden assets plus $1, $2 million in attorney fees and court costs. She also ordered a complete forensic audit of Anderson Mining Corporation and referred the case to federal prosecutors for criminal charges. More importantly, Judge Ironshell's ruling established legal precedent for how courts would handle sophisticated asset concealment schemes in future divorce cases. Her detailed analysis of the evidence and her findings about the criminal nature of Thomas Anderson's activities would be cited in similar cases throughout the region for years to come. The criminal charges followed quickly after the divorce trial ended. 3 weeks later, Thomas Anderson was indicted on federal charges including embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud. The charges carried potential prison sentences of up to 20 years and millions of dollars in fines and restitution. The federal indictment revealed the full scope of the criminal network that Thomas Anderson had been part of. 12 other defendants were charged in connection with the Mountain West Financial Services conspiracy, including lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors who had been helping clients hide assets during divorce proceedings. The indictment alleged that the conspiracy had been operating for over 8 years and had helped clients hide over $200 million in assets. The network had been charging substantial fees for their services while helping clients commit what amounted to legalized theft from their spouses and the court system. Thomas Anderson's business empire began to collapse almost immediately after the criminal charges were filed. Anderson Mining Corporation's board of directors voted to remove him as CEO and began legal proceedings to recover the money he had stolen from the company. Several major contracts were canceled, and the company's stock price fell by over 60% in the weeks following the indictment. The personal cost to Thomas Anderson was equally devastating. His reputation in the business community was destroyed, his assets were frozen by federal authorities, and he found himself facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. The man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in the Black Hills region was now a pariah whose name had become synonymous with corporate fraud and marital betrayal. But the most significant outcome of the case was the impact it had on Mary Running Bear's life and career. The woman who had been fired and blacklisted for reporting criminal activity had become one of the most respected forensic accountants in the region. Her courage in coming forward had not only exposed a major fraud scheme but had also established her as a leading expert in financial crime investigation. Thomas Anderson ultimately pleaded guilty to federal charges to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, but he still received 6 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $4.8 million in restitution to Anderson Mining Corporation. His plea agreement required him to cooperate with federal investigators in prosecuting the other members of the Mountain West Financial Services conspiracy. The company that Thomas Anderson had inherited from his father was sold to a Colorado-based mining conglomerate to pay legal fees and restitution. The sale preserved jobs for most of the company's employees, but it also marked the end of a family business that had been operating in the Black Hills for over 50 years. Susan Anderson received the financial settlement she deserved and used part of it to establish the Anderson Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provides legal assistance to women who are fighting to recover hidden assets during divorce proceedings. The foundation has helped dozens of women throughout the region expose sophisticated fraud schemes and recover millions of dollars in hidden assets. Mary Running Bear's career transformation was equally remarkable. Her expertise in financial fraud investigation and her reputation for integrity had made her one of the most sought-after forensic accountants in the northern Rocky Mountain region. She established her own consulting firm, Running Bear Financial Investigations, which specializes in helping attorneys and law enforcement agencies identify and recover hidden assets. Over the past 2 years, Mary's firm has helped recover over $50 million in hidden assets for clients throughout the region. Her work has been instrumental in exposing fraud schemes, holding corrupt executives accountable, and ensuring that victims of financial crime receive the justice they deserve. The personal cost of becoming a whistleblower had been significant for Mary. Her career in corporate finance was permanently damaged, and she had endured months of financial hardship while building her new business. But she had also discovered something more valuable than career security. She had found purpose in helping people who were being victimized by powerful individuals who thought their wealth and influence made them untouchable. The legal reforms that grew out of the Anderson case have had a lasting impact on how courts handle sophisticated asset concealment schemes. The Anderson Act, signed into law by South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, requires enhanced disclosure requirements for high-asset divorce cases and provides state funding for forensic accounting in cases where asset concealment is suspected. The law has been adopted by several other states and has become a model for divorce reform advocates throughout the country. Legal experts credit the Anderson case with raising awareness about the scope of financial fraud in divorce proceedings and providing tools for courts to combat sophisticated concealment schemes. Mary's testimony in the Anderson case has become a template for prosecutors and attorneys handling similar cases throughout the region. The evidence she gathered and the methods she used to expose Thomas Anderson's fraud are now taught in law schools and accounting programs as examples of how to identify and document financial crimes. The FBI's investigation of the Mountain West Financial Services conspiracy ultimately led to the prosecution of 23 defendants and the recovery of over $150 million in hidden assets. The network's operations were completely dismantled, and several of its key figures received lengthy federal prison sentences. Agent William Ironclad, who had worked closely with Mary throughout the investigation, was promoted to supervisory special agent and now leads the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit for the Rocky Mountain region. He credits Mary's courage and expertise with making it possible to expose one of the most sophisticated financial fraud schemes in the region's history. The Anderson case also had a significant impact on the broader conversation about corporate accountability and the protection of whistleblowers. Mary's experience demonstrated both the personal costs of reporting criminal activity and the crucial role that whistleblowers play in exposing corruption and protecting the public interest. Several corporate governance reforms have been implemented as a result of the case, including enhanced whistleblower protections and stronger oversight of executive compensation and expense reporting. The reforms have made it more difficult for executives to use company resources for personal purposes and have provided better protection for employees who report suspected criminal activity. 3 years after Mary Running Bear's testimony brought down Thomas Anderson's criminal empire, the impact of her courage continues to resonate throughout the Black Hills and beyond. The case has become a landmark in both criminal law and divorce proceedings, establishing precedents that continue to protect victims of financial fraud and hold corrupt executives accountable. The Anderson Mining Corporation has been rebuilt under new ownership and management, with enhanced financial controls and transparency measures that have made it a model for corporate governance in the mining industry. The company now employs over 300 people and has become one of the most respected mining operations in the region. Mary Running Bear's consulting firm has grown to include 5 full-time investigators and has expanded its operations to include cases throughout the western United States. Her work has been recognized by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and she has been invited to speak at conferences throughout the country about financial fraud investigation and whistleblower protection. The personal satisfaction that Mary derives from her work goes beyond professional recognition. She has helped dozens of women recover millions of dollars in hidden assets and has played a crucial role in exposing fraud schemes that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. Her work has sent a clear message to corrupt executives that their criminal activities will not be tolerated, regardless of their wealth or influence. The Anderson case has also had a lasting impact on the legal profession. Patricia Standing Bear's successful prosecution of the case has established her as one of the leading divorce attorneys in the region, and her methods for identifying and recovering hidden assets have been adopted by attorneys throughout the country. The case has been studied extensively in law schools and business schools as an example of how sophisticated financial fraud can be detected and prosecuted. Mary's methodical approach to documenting evidence and her understanding of complex financial structures have become a template for investigators and attorneys working on similar cases. The federal investigation that grew out of Mary's evidence has led to ongoing reforms in how financial crimes are investigated and prosecuted. The cooperation between federal agents, state prosecutors, and private attorneys that made the Anderson case successful has become a model for complex financial crime investigations. The personal cost of Mary's decision to become a whistleblower was significant, but the impact of her courage has been immeasurable. She has helped establish legal precedents that protect other whistleblowers, exposed a criminal network that had been operating with impunity for years, and ensured that victims of financial fraud have the tools and resources they need to seek justice. The lessons of the Anderson case extend far beyond the specifics of financial fraud and divorce proceedings. The case demonstrates the importance of individual courage in confronting corruption, the power of thorough documentation in exposing criminal activity, and the crucial role that whistleblowers play in protecting the public interest. Mary Running Bear's story has become an inspiration to other employees who witness criminal activity but are afraid to report it. Her experience shows that while the personal cost of whistleblowing can be significant, the impact of speaking truth to power can be transformative for entire communities. The Anderson case also demonstrates the importance of having robust legal systems that can respond effectively to sophisticated criminal schemes. The cooperation between federal and state authorities, the expertise of forensic accountants, and the dedication of attorneys who specialize in complex financial cases were all crucial to the successful prosecution of the case. Perhaps most importantly, the Anderson case shows that justice is possible even when the odds seem overwhelming. Thomas Anderson had wealth, influence, and sophisticated legal representation, but he was ultimately brought down by the courage of one woman who refused to remain silent in the face of criminal activity. The case has become a symbol of the ongoing struggle between those who would abuse their power for personal gain and those who are willing to accept personal costs to ensure that justice is served. Mary Running Bear's victory over Thomas Anderson represents a triumph of integrity over corruption, truth over deception, and justice over greed. As Mary continues her work exposing financial fraud and helping victims recover stolen assets, she carries with her the knowledge that her courage has made a difference. The Anderson case will continue to serve as a reminder that some fights are worth any personal cost, and that truth has a way of prevailing even when powerful people try to suppress it. The morning sun rises over the Black Hills, painting the peaks in shades of gold and pink that have inspired generations of Lakota people to see these mountains as sacred. From her office window in downtown Rapid City, Mary Running Bear can see Mount Rushmore in the distance, a reminder of the complex history of this land and the ongoing struggle between power and justice. Running Bear Financial Investigations now occupies the entire third floor of the historic Alex Johnson building, with a team of 12 investigators working on cases throughout the western United States. The firm has recovered over $200 million in hidden assets for clients and has played a crucial role in exposing dozens of sophisticated fraud schemes. Mary's reputation as a forensic accountant has made her one of the most sought-after experts in the field, but she remains grounded in the values her grandmother taught her about service to community and commitment to truth. Every case she takes on is evaluated not just on its financial merits, but on its potential to protect victims and hold corrupt individuals accountable. The Anderson Foundation, established by Susan Anderson with her divorce settlement, has grown into a major force for reform in family law. The foundation has provided legal assistance to over 400 women throughout the region and has helped recover more than $75 million in hidden assets. The foundation's work has been instrumental in passing legislation that strengthens asset disclosure requirements and provides better protection for divorce fraud victims. Thomas Anderson was released from federal prison 8 months ago and is now working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Denver. His assets remain frozen to pay ongoing restitution, and he is prohibited from serving in any executive capacity for any publicly traded company. The man who once controlled a multi-million-dollar mining empire now lives in a modest apartment and drives a used pickup truck. The Mountain West Financial Services conspiracy has been completely dismantled, with all 23 defendants having been prosecuted and sentenced. The network's operations were so thoroughly exposed that similar fraud schemes throughout the region have been forced to shut down or significantly modify their operations to avoid detection. The legal reforms that grew out of the Anderson case have been adopted by 15 states and have become a model for federal legislation that is currently being considered by Congress. The Anderson Act has made it significantly more difficult for wealthy individuals to hide assets during divorce proceedings and has provided better tools for courts to identify and combat sophisticated concealment schemes. Mary Running Bear's personal life has also been transformed by her decision to become a whistleblower. She has remarried to Dr. Joseph Crow Feather, a physician who works with the Indian Health Service on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Together, they have built a life that combines professional success with deep commitment to their community and cultural values. Her 3 children have all been inspired by their mother's example of courage and integrity. Her eldest daughter, Rachel, is now a law student at the University of South Dakota, specializing in federal Indian law and financial crimes. Her son, Michael, is studying accounting at Black Hills State University with plans to join his mother's firm after graduation. Her youngest daughter, Sarah, is a sophomore at Red Cloud High School on the Pine Ridge Reservation, where she is active in student government and community service. The story of Mary Running Bear's courage in exposing Thomas Anderson's fraud has become part of the oral history of the Oglala Lakota Nation, passed down as an example of how traditional values of truth and justice can triumph over modern forms of corruption and greed. Her grandmother's teachings about the importance of speaking truth to power have been validated in ways that neither woman could have imagined. The Anderson case continues to serve as a benchmark for financial crime investigation and prosecution throughout the region. Law enforcement agencies regularly consult with Mary's firm on complex financial fraud cases, and her methods for identifying and documenting sophisticated concealment schemes have become standard practice for forensic accountants throughout the country. But perhaps the most significant legacy of the Anderson case is the message it has sent to potential whistleblowers throughout the region and beyond. Mary Running Bear's example has inspired dozens of other employees to report criminal activity, leading to the exposure of additional fraud schemes and the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen assets. The case has also served as a deterrent to other executives who might be tempted to use their positions for personal gain. The swift and comprehensive prosecution of Thomas Anderson and his co-conspirators has made it clear that sophisticated financial crimes will be detected and prosecuted, regardless of the wealth or influence of the perpetrators. As Mary sits in her office reviewing case files for 3 new investigations involving suspected asset concealment, she reflects on the journey that began with a discovery in a blizzard-covered office building 5 years ago. The personal costs of her decision to become a whistleblower were significant, but the impact of her courage has been immeasurable. The phone rings, and Mary answers to find another attorney with another case involving another corrupt executive who thinks he can hide money from his wife during divorce proceedings. She smiles as she reaches for her notebook, knowing that somewhere in the Black Hills, another Thomas Anderson is about to learn that some secrets are too dangerous to keep. The battle against financial corruption is never really over, but every case that Mary wins makes it a little harder for the next fraudster to succeed. Every whistleblower who comes forward makes it a little easier for the next person to find the courage to speak truth to power. In the end, Mary Running Bear's story is about more than financial fraud and divorce proceedings. It's about the choice between staying silent and speaking up, between accepting injustice and fighting for what's right, between protecting yourself and protecting others who cannot protect themselves. Mary chose to speak up, and she has never regretted that decision. Even when it cost her everything she thought she wanted, it gave her something more valuable, the knowledge that when it mattered most, she did the right thing. And in the shadow of Mount Rushmore, where the faces of presidents watch over the Black Hills, that knowledge provides a satisfaction that no amount of money could ever buy. The sacred mountains continue to stand as they have for millions of years, witnesses to the ongoing struggle between power and justice, corruption and integrity, greed and truth. And in the offices of Running Bear Financial Investigations, that struggle continues every day, one case at a time, one victim at a time, one act of courage at a time. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about, the power of one person's courage to change the world, one truth at a time. Thanks for listening to this powerful story. Subscribe for more stories about the surprising ways people change our lives for the better. See you in the next story.